They sat at my heavy oak table, the very same place where I had broken bread and shared decades of dreams with their mother, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just crumbled into an irreversible abyss. I watched them, my own flesh and blood, smiling victoriously as they clutched the crystal glasses they believed were their final ticket to the luxurious life they had always dreamed of at my expense. Their arrogance was almost tangible in the air of the room, convinced that my aging mind had become cloudy and completely helpless before their cruel greed. But in that fateful moment, I had already made the move. To truly understand the depth of this incredibly cruel betrayal that tore my heart apart, we must go back for a moment to a time when the sun shone quite differently over our old estate. We must recall the scent of the ripening vines and the sounds of that cheerful, sincere family laughter that once filled every crack in the walls of this house, built with love by my honorable ancestors centuries ago. This was a home built on solid promises of eternal family loyalty and deep respect for the elderly, a place where honor was valued far more than any fleeting gold. However, this house became a dark stage. Before we continue with this incredibly painful confession about greed and the subsequent justice that followed, please consider subscribing to this channel because your support allows us to share these lessons. Your presence here makes a truly great difference and helps us build a community based on truth. So I ask you to write in the comments which part of the world you are watching from right now. Your connection means a lot to me and gives me all the necessary strength to keep telling these stories that life itself writes in the cruelest and most unexpected ways. Now let us return to the days when I felt the cold. I am Arthur, a man whose hands bear the deep and lasting scars of 80 harsh winters spent in the fields and my vineyards, fighting for every inch of this sacred land. I believed that these scars were the testimony of a life well lived for my family, for the children to whom I provided absolutely everything they ever needed or desired in life. My late wife, Eleanor, always said that our home was a safe haven of peace, but after her premature death, the walls grew colder, and the eyes of my children became calculating and gray. I was old, but my mind was not the fog they imagined. I used to be the firm pillar of this family, the man they asked for advice before every important decision. But now I had become merely a nuisance in their modern plans. My rich past and all my great sacrifices slowly faded before their urgent need for quick money and an easy life they did not actually earn themselves. I sat in my room listening to them talk about me as an object that needed to be disposed of as quickly and cheaply as possible. I felt a pain that no physical illness can inflict, the pain of knowing that those I loved most became my worst enemies. But a spark remained. This estate, which we affectionately call the Old Oak, was not just an ordinary piece of land or a pile of stones. It was the living, beating heart of our family for generations past. Every stone in the barn walls and every fruit tree in the orchard carried the indelible memory of the hands that lovingly tended them long before me. My mother planted the roses with her own hands, which still smelled of every happy summer, while my father built the workshop where I learned to work. This land was sacred, filled with stories of survival that cannot be bought. But for my children, it was a number. Eleanor and I spent more than 50 happy years here, building our dreams from absolutely nothing, turning the rocky soil into fertile and very rich fields. I remember every morning spent in the vineyard, feeling the dew on my feet and the smell of the earth that promised life and a secure future for our children. This estate was the embodiment of our shared journey, the place where our children took their first steps and learned about honesty and hard work. Every corner of our house had its significance, and every creak of the old floor was a familiar sound that told me I was safely home. Then she died. I was especially proud of my wine cellar, a collection I had built over decades, saving the best bottles for moments that were supposed to be a celebration of our family heritage. For me, wine was not just a drink, but the liquid history of our land, the result of patience and respect for the nature I loved so much. I planned for my son to continue that tradition, to learn the secrets of the trade I inherited from my grandfather. But he saw only dollars in those bottles. Every bottle I lovingly stored became a target of their greed, a symbol of what they were ready to sell. The humiliations began slowly, almost imperceptibly, like those long shadows that stretch at sunset on a cold autumn afternoon in our large house. First, they started removing Eleanor's photographs from the fireplace, brazenly saying they were modernizing the space to make it more attractive to the potential buyers they were already secretly seeking. My rocking chair, my favorite place for deep thought, ended up in the garage because it was too old-fashioned for their new, cold concept. Every time I tried to say something, they interrupted me mid-sentence, treating my words as annoying noise that should be completely ignored. I felt a deep pain in my tired soul. Then they began to control my mail and all phone calls, brazenly claiming it was for my safety because I had supposedly become very gullible. My daughter-in-law would examine my personal receipts with disgust, complaining about every little thing I bought for the garden or my beloved orchard. They talked about me as if I were not present in the room at all, discussing my needs with a contempt that burned more than an open wound. "The old man no longer knows what he is doing," they would whisper loudly, not knowing that my ears still caught every cruel word. Every meal became a bitter lesson in my alleged incompetence. One evening they kicked me out of my workshop, claiming the tools had become dangerous for my shaking hands and that I needed to rest more. That was the only place where I felt useful, where I could still create something valuable with my old and tired hands. They locked the heavy doors and hid the key, leaving me to stand in front of the threshold like an exile in my own yard without any hope. The feeling of helplessness was devastating, a physical pain in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe under the weight of their injustice. My chisel and old plane were now gathering dust. Even my rare meetings with old friends became almost impossible because they decided who was allowed to enter the house under the pretext of my peace. Harold, my best friend with whom I had played chess for 50 years, was rudely turned away at the door because I was supposedly resting. I was completely isolated, locked in a cage they built out of false care and cold control over my daily and peaceful life. Every move I made was under a magnifying glass. Every decision was canceled by their arrogant attitude that they knew best. I felt like a tree losing its leaves while they waited for my collapse. The food they served me was bland and presented without a crumb of love, often with comments about how I should be grateful that they care. Martha, my daughter-in-law, would look at me with pure contempt while I ate slowly, as if I were consuming resources that belonged exclusively to her. "Arthur, be careful not to get dirty again," she would say in a tone used to address a child, destroying every crumb of my remaining and wounded dignity. My son would just stay silent, looking at his phone, not daring to look me in the eyes while his wife ruled. That table became a cold place of betrayal. The worst was when they mockingly started talking about selling my old watch, the only item that belonged to my grandfather for an entire century. They said it was just old junk and that the money would be better invested in their stocks and meaningless luxury. Every tick of that watch reminded me of the strength of tradition they so easily discarded for quick and very easy profit. When I tried to protect it, they just laughed loudly, saying I no longer had any right to vote on the family property. Then I realized that for them I was no longer a father, but merely a temporary obstacle. Then the moment happened that changed everything. The moment when the truth finally came to light in its ugliest and darkest form imaginable. It was late evening, and I was moving quietly towards the kitchen to get a glass of water, trying hard not to wake anyone up. Through the half-open dining room door, I saw Martha standing next to my glass of wine that she always prepared before my bedtime. In her hand, she held a small bottle and carefully dropped a few clear drops into my glass, while her face was twisted in an expression of cold and calculated determination I had never seen before. My heart beat wildly in my chest as I watched her carefully stir the wine with a small spoon, ensuring the drops dissolved completely. I heard her whisper to my son, who was standing in the shadows, saying that with this, the process will finally be accelerated. My own son, whom I raised with so much love, just nodded in agreement, showing not a shred of hesitation or human compassion. That moment of realization was like a sharp knife tearing through my soul, revealing the abyss of betrayal into which they were ready to push their own father for a handful of dirty money and the freedom they desired. I returned to my room in complete silence, while my legs shook from the shock and disbelief that completely paralyzed my entire body. I stared into the dark, realizing that they no longer planned just my isolation or the sale of the estate, but my physical end. Every bit of their false care and every served glass of wine was part of their deadly plan to remove me from the path. The feeling of betrayal was absolute, planned with such eerie precision by those to whom I gave life and everything they ever had. I was alone in a house full of snakes, waiting for my final breath. I thank God for that moment of accidental realization that saved my life and gave me the opportunity to finally defend myself against them. I looked at Eleanor's picture on the nightstand and saw her strength that still lived in my tired but highly determined eyes. That moment of clarity was the end of my long suffering. I was no longer a victim, but a strategic player in the game they started. Every doubt vanished, replaced by a cold reason that told me I must act quickly, but perfectly silently. My children thought I was finished, but I had only just begun to write the final chapter of honor. I did not scream, nor did I immediately confront them with the painful truth that evening, even though a scream was stuck deep in my throat. I decided to remain the same old grandfather they had created in their heads, while inside I built an impregnable legal fortress. My silence became my strongest shield, allowing them to continue with their plan with an even greater dose of arrogant security. I watched them at breakfast, exchanging knowing looks, completely unaware that I now saw every intention clearly as day. I decided that their punishment would be just as methodical and cold as their plan for my destruction. Now I ask you, what would you do if you discovered your own children were planning to take your life behind your back? Would you forgive them because of family bonds, or would you, like me, use all your intelligence and patience to strike back? Comment your thoughts below, because I am truly interested in how you would position yourself in this situation where trust turns into a weapon. Your perspective is important to us as we continue with this story about the return of dignity and the strength of an old man who does not give up. Now let's return to the moment I made my first move. The first step was a secret visit to my old friend Harold, a retired lawyer who knew every corner of the law in this country. We met in secret, far from the eyes of my children, bringing with me the bottle of drops I managed to secretly take. Harold was horrified by their behavior, but also impressed by my calmness as we planned the revocation of every power of attorney they ever had. We established an independent trust that would manage the estate after my death, ensuring the land never ends up in their hands. Every document was notarized by a notary public who was my old acquaintance. I contacted my bank manager and withdrew all authorizations from their accounts, transferring the funds to secure and completely locked accounts. I saw how much money they had already secretly extracted, each number a new proof of their shameful greed and lack of honor. Friends from the banking world helped me track the money trail and ensure that every cent was protected from their dirty attempts. The process was long and required surgical precision, but I felt satisfaction as I slowly extinguished their sources of power. My children thought they were the masters, but they were sorely mistaken in their assessment of my strength and intelligence. Then I secretly visited Dr. Jenkins to perform a series of cognitive tests and examinations that confirmed my full and clear sanity. I needed irrefutable proof of my mental sharpness, a confirmation that would destroy any future lie about my alleged illness or dementia. The doctor was amazed by my results, confirming that my mind is sharper than many younger people he meets every day in his practice. With that document in hand, sealed with an official stamp, my defense was complete, and their story became an impossible fairy tale. I was ready for the final act of justice that would take place right before their eyes. The day of the great celebration arrived, a dinner where they planned to celebrate my supposed surrender and the signing of the estate sale documents. Martha was especially accommodating, carrying that same bottle of wine I recognized, while my son prepared the papers on the table. They looked down on me, explaining how much better I would be in a nursing home, and how I would have all the necessary care there. Their arrogance was at its peak, completely unaware of the abyss that was opening before them with my first cold move. I sat quietly, waiting for the moment Martha would serve me that fatal glass. Martha handed me the glass with a fake smile, and I thanked her with the same smile, placing it right in front of me. "Martha, dear, please bring me that old book from the study," I asked her politely, knowing she would surely leave the room. As soon as she left, and my son turned around to reach for the pen, I quickly switched our glasses, placing mine in front of her seat. She returned with the book, completely unaware of the switch, and sat in her place, ready to raise a toast to our new beginning. My heart beat calmly as we raised our glasses into the air. Martha took a large sip of the wine, and I did the same, watching her face slowly change from a look of triumph to confusion. Within an hour, she started complaining about severe dizziness and nausea, while her voice became weaker and increasingly slurred. My son panicked and tried to call an ambulance while I sat calmly and watched them struggle with the consequences of their own dark actions. When they took her to the hospital, I was left alone with him, handing him a folder with documents proving their fraud and my legal protective moves. Everything was completely over for their wicked and murderous plans. "I know absolutely everything," I told him with a voice that carried the authority of a man who commanded thousands of workers during his life. I showed him the evidence of the forged signatures and the medical reports that confirm my full sanity before all laws. I informed him that the estate was under the protection of an independent trust, and that he had just lost all right to inheritance or any help. His world collapsed in an instant, leaving him in the ruins of his own ambitions, while his face was pale with fear. He realized that his wife had just drank what was intended for me. Martha ended up in the hospital, not knowing that the police had already been notified about the poisoning attempt thanks to Harold and the gathered evidence. My son was left with nothing, facing the severe legal consequences of his shameful actions and the loss of everything he depended on his entire life. My house breathed again, freed from their highly toxic presence, while I returned Eleanor's precious photographs to their place of honor on the fireplace. The peace I felt then was profound, the peace of a man who fulfilled his duty to his ancestors and himself. My dignity was restored after a hard and very long battle. Now the old oak once again serves those who appreciate it, and I enjoy the silence of my vineyards, knowing my legacy is completely safe. Every morning I sit in my workshop. The smell of fresh wood fills the air again, reminding me of all that I managed to defend. My children received the hardest lesson about the price of betrayal and the loss of honor, a lesson they will carry for the rest of their failed lives. I am just an old guardian who defended his home from a storm that came from his own blood. I am proud of the path I walked and the peace. Eleanor's garden is blooming again, and her roses smell stronger than ever before, as if celebrating the victory of truth over dark and cruel greed. I often sit on the terrace watching the beautiful sunset, and I feel her hand on my tired shoulder, knowing I did what was just. My name is Arthur, and I am a man who took his life back into his own hands, proving that justice always finds a way. My heart is peaceful, and my soul is finally free from the heavy burden they tried to impose on me in my old age, under my own roof. I am a free man. So, I ask you at the end of this story, what would you have done with children who tried to poison you in your own home? Would you have had the strength for forgiveness, or would you have shown them the hardest lesson about justice and the loss of absolutely everything they ever had? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences can be a light to someone going through similar family storms all around the world right now. Thank you for listening to me, and may you always be accompanied by the wisdom and strength of those who value honor above everything else.